when something goes completely askew in your day, some unexpected event knocks down your plans, and you too also burst into blessing. For life is teaching you a lesson, and the very event you believe to be unwanted, you yourself called forth.
How many of us can say we're grateful when things go wrong, especially in today's Instagram perfect world? My guest today says that it's these very trials that offer our greatest potential for personal growth. And our worst enemy is actually the best friend of this growth. Pierre Pradervand is the author of more than 16 books, including The Gentle Art of Blessing and his newly released 365 Blessings to Heal Myself and the World. Pierre has worked for decades in personal development and social justice in more than 40 countries, and through his writing, speaking, and workshops, Pierre helps people to live simpler, more contented lives. In our conversation, Pierre shares how he came to discover the life-changing practice of blessing. We explore how to connect with this love in your heart and harness good intentions, even for your worst enemy. Pierre's uplifting spirit is truly an inspiration, and it was an absolute delight to speak with him and bring you today's episode. I'm Aimée Dubreuil, and this is the Culturized Podcast. Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with me. I really appreciate it. I heard you speak at a conference in the Geneva area about a month ago now, or a few weeks ago, and you were talking about the practice and art of blessing. And what was incredible was to feel there was an actual palpable energy shift in the room as you were telling and sharing your story about blessing and the discovery of that journey, but also reading some blessings to us. You could really feel it. And by the end of your talk, people were on their feet. I mean, they were overcome with what I've since come to learn you describe as this feeling of love. Blessing is a wish of love. And I'm really delighted to hear your story and hear how that came about and what triggered your journey to discover this transformative practice of blessing.
Okay, well, it started many years ago. I was working in the 80s in French-speaking Switzerland for a group of NGOs involved in international development in third world countries. And I'd been hired to start a new program for schools on informing schools of North-South or third world issues. And I just loved my work. I was totally dedicated to the extent I had a camp bed in the office. And when I missed the last train to go home, I used to sleep in the office. And at one moment I wanted to start a roving exhibit on world hunger, because world hunger is still one of the major challenges in the world today. One estimates that close to 900 million people go to bed hungry every day. So I had this concept of this roving exhibit. And my sponsor said that these four organizations, Pierre, sorry, we don't have a penny in the budget for that. You just have to skip it. I thought, well, I'm still going to realize it and make it real, but I'll take the money out of my savings. And in terms of buying power today, I invested at least $25,000. It's about the same thing in Swiss francs, 20,000 euros at least. And the exhibit worked very well. It was even spoken of in the newspapers, and schools were very impressed by it. And it was called, the whole exhibit was called Ending Hunger Today. And just at that time, I joined an international project called the Hunger Project in the States, I guess around the late 70s, and which was also a campaign to end hunger in the world. And the slogan of the campaign was Ending Hunger by the year 2000. Now, my sponsors didn't like this campaign a bit, I guess, because they were a bit leftist and came from the United States, and they didn't like the methods we used. We went into the streets to get people to sign little cards against hunger. And finally, they forbidden me to speak about this campaign in my work in schools. Now, this was so unbelievable. Here are organizations fighting hunger, asking me to not speak about a world campaign to end hunger. It was completely ludicrous. But they were my boss, so I accepted. But I continued using the slogan, the end of hunger for the year 2000. And there was one guy in these 4 organizations who just hated my guts. And so they convened a meeting, the 4 organizations, and there were no minutes taken. It was totally legal. And they said, look, either you stop saying that we can end hunger by the year 2000 because the Hunger Project says this, or then you quit your job. And I couldn't believe it. Here are organizations fighting hunger who had applauded my roving exhibit, Ending Hunger Today, forbidding me to speak about ending hunger by the year 2000. So evidently I quit my job. And in the following months, I developed the hugest resentment that was really eating me up. Resentment is like a rat that gnaws your entrails. I used to work. The minute I woke up, I started thinking about this under the shower, preparing breakfast, going to the post office or the supermarket. And it became an absolute obsession. And I knew I was harming myself, but I couldn't chase it. I meditated, I prayed, I did all sorts of spiritual readings, nothing. And one day, just reading the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' statement, bless those who curse you. Well, of course, Pierre, it's so simple. All I have to do is bless them. And I started at that moment blessing these people in their health, their joy, their abundance, their work, their family relations, every conceivable way. And at the beginning, it was in the head because it was in obedience to what I believed a revealed commandment, but it moved rapidly down to the heart because blessing is 100% heart energy, and I really insist on that. And a few months later, suddenly in the street, I started blessing people. And wherever I went, the post office, the supermarket, just walking the street or on the bus, I would bless people. And I took trains quite a lot at that time. And I would walk the whole length of the train in both directions to be sure to bless every single person on that train. And it became so joyful, really extraordinarily joyful. And I'd been asked to give a talk to an international youth meeting in Zurich on the theme blessing, healing the world. And while I was writing my text, suddenly I received an inflow of inspiration such as never in my life, before or since. As if I was a scribe under dictation, and I received this text, The Gentle Art of Blessing, which is the basis of the practice. And as I had quite a worldwide correspondence at the time, I started sharing this little text in my letters, and people started replying to me from everywhere saying, it works. And I have an extraordinary publisher, just an amazing man. And I'd written a short document on this and showed it to him and said, Pierre, you must write a book on this. So that's how the book came out, first in French and then later in English. And now it's been published in 6 or 7 languages.
It's a book I've been enjoying the last few weeks since I discovered it. It tells this story and also a bit your philosophy or your take on what blessing is. Because exactly. I always thought of blessing as, or until I heard you speak, I always thought of blessing as something priests did in church. But you say that actually it's nothing to do with that.
Not at all. It's it's a command that Jesus gave to the man on the street. There's so many people who think it's reserved to priests and ministers. It's completely wrong. Anyone with a sincere heart can bless. And so that's, and also my description of blessing. It's not saying, we bless you in the name of the Father, Son, the Almighty, the Holy Ghost, and see you next week. No, it's sending love energy from the heart to any situation, any person, an animal, anything. There's nothing, no situation one cannot bless. In French, the word has such heavy liturgical, ecclesiastical, religious connotations. In my second book on blessing, which has come out also in French, the publisher and I decided to avoid the word blessing because, and I had created many years ago, we started a blessing group in Geneva where we use blessing as a practice to heal situations and people. And we changed the title of the group and we call it a group of benevolence and gratitude. So words are important, and the use of words. So what I mean by blessing is something completely different from what usually people with a church background think of. I even have an atheist friend who circulated my book on blessing.
Well, reading it, it certainly has a universal feel to it. There isn't any one given, say, religion. It doesn't exclude anybody. And that's something you write about in the book, Gentle Art of Blessing, is how this is really something that's gone back for millennia. And it's a human practice.
I think it was one of the original religious practices in prehistoric times of our caveman ancestors. They were surrounded by all these mysterious natural forces. And, they could have, maybe once they'd started harvesting, failed harvest, and which would mean famine, and a successful harvest, which would mean living decently. And I think spontaneously, blessing must have sprung up as a practice to thank these awesome forces that seemed to be shaping their lives.
And the word thanks and gratitude that you mentioned earlier in being how you've renamed the circle, that's what struck me actually the most and was the biggest surprise in this practice. Because again, coming with a very limited notion of what blessing could be, I marveled at how it really sprung up this sense of gratitude, deep gratitude.
I say that gratitude and blessing are both sides of the same coin. When you bless, you are feeling gratitude for the person you are blessing, or for the situation. If you are blessing somebody who is very hostile, unconsciously you are blessing the practice itself and the universe that has given you this situation to overcome. And any expression of gratitude implies blessing for me. So they are really so linked together.
That practice, and particularly with difficult situations, I think when you discovered blessing, it was through a very difficult time. It was that tormentor in the office, or the equivalent of somebody's, and we all have one. We've all got a tormentor in the office. And you faced that head on. How is it that how did it come to you, this sense of, yes, I'm harming myself in all of this rage? It's
so evident that, when you have bad feelings, we all know enough about psychosomatic medicine to know that when we feel anger or hatred or whatever, we are harming ourselves. our own uh, our own immune system.
We've all faced those difficult situations in an office situation, I'm thinking, where a lot of people feel and are going through a very similar pain that you experienced in quite an intense way. And I was wondering how you found the strength inside to bless people who you at that time felt were the cause and who had caused this anguish.
Well, simply, I did it out of obedience at the beginning. I felt, that Jesus is a person. I don't belong to any religion, but I respect great avatars like Jesus, Buddha, and others. And I felt this was a revealed commandment, a revealed statement. And I did it at the beginning out of obedience. And then, of course, later it came out of joy and gratitude. But I'd like to stress that it took me 3 years of blessing to completely overcome my resentment towards this man who'd caused me to leave my job. And I'm also been involved with a death row inmate in Texas for 22 years now. Extraordinary man we'll talk about later. And I wasn't too happy about the job George Bush was doing as governor of Texas when he was governor, as he'd decided to execute more persons than any other governor in the history of Texas till then. And it took me 3 years of blessing George Bush to really feel sincerely the blessing. Now I've practiced so much, it becomes much easier. When Donald Trump was nominated, just not when he nominated himself as candidate for the presidency, I started blessing him that first day. And I bless him, President Putin and President Assad and Kim of Korea. I bless them every day. And today, it's so easy. I don't have to agree with someone politically to bless them.
And how do you bless them?
Well, I do always listening. For instance, I may bless them in their humility. I bless them in their compassion. I bless them this morning. I bless them in their deep listening, their sincerity. Every day changes. I don't have a fixed way of blessing that would go back to old church liturgical practices. It's always something fresh. I've constantly discovered new ways of blessing over the years. As a matter of fact, over the past year, I've developed something that I'd never done before, based on the idea of, there's an old version, Aramaic version of the second commandment. Aramaic was the language Jesus spoke. Instead of saying, love your neighbor as yourself, it states, love your neighbor who is yourself. And in the past year, I bless people constantly in the street, in the bus. I have no car, so I take public transport constantly. And I now precede the blessing by, I love you. And boy, that is so demanding. It has added a completely new dimension to my practice of blessing, because you can bless somebody, without feeling a deep feeling for them, but you can't look at a person and say silently in your heart, I love you, without feeling it. It's not an intellectual concept. It's a feeling of the heart. So I hope I'll continue learning till my last day.
That is a real journey, I think, from where you started. You mentioned some names of people that I think many of us would say, how would it be possible to find in your heart blessing for some people who've committed the worst acts on earth? And I think that's it in a nutshell, though, isn't it? Because you're tuning in and tapping into the love that is possible, And that would be able to transform and change the world if we could all get a little bit closer to it.
Exactly. I mean, in my thinking, in my spiritual blessing, I can say sincerely to President Assad, who's considered the worst criminal on the planet today. I mean, he's destroyed his country, 6 million refugees and children gassed with, terrible things. I can really say to him, I love you. And when I bless President Trump, I can also say in my heart, I love you, my brother. Because one of the things that has helped me most on my spiritual path maybe in my lifetime is the clear realization that everyone is at every moment at their highest level of consciousness. And if they could be elsewhere, they would be, but they're not. President Trump is where he is today. And President Assad is where he is today. And that's what his level of consciousness has led him to do. I'm not there to judge anyone, just to bless.